it's not often that 100+ people gather together to have an honest conversation about sexuality. So I'm really, I want to honor all of you for crossing that threshold and stepping into this conversation, both in your class and for inviting me here today, where I might be pushing the edge of some sensibilities a bit, which I'm good with. And my intention in whatever I do or how I work with people, or my orientation around working with clients, and I've been working with clients for about 15 years now, doing workshops, writing about the topic of, which has evolved more clearly as I've gone down the path about this idea of fetish sexuality. But it's also, there's a broader context of just sexual honesty and authenticity to begin with, done in a conscious way. So that's what I would like to talk with you about, but I want to jump back to first just really honoring you all for, one, your courage to step into this, because there's a lot of people, I'm sure, who looked at that listing as the class and were, whoop. Because if you come into this context, you're going to have to start talking honestly eventually about your own sexuality and taking a look at what's going on with your own sexuality. And that's a powerful step to take, but it's not one that's encouraged very often in our culture. We don't bring our gaze to our sexuality very often. We keep it in the dark, out of the light. So this idea of bringing it into a conscious perspective is my sense of where things need to go, but it's also the longest journey to take, because it's so, we're at the beginning of it. I also get the sense that you've come here, not today necessarily, but on this track that you're on, out of some sense of you're heading towards what they call the helping professions, right? So there's some part in your heart that's coming alive that has a compassion and an empathy, I think, and maybe a more sex-positive view than the generations past have brought to the equation. So I just want to bless you for my sense of that, what each of you are moving towards. And that's going to be important, because right now there's an explosion of sexuality coming alive on the planet in a way that's unprecedented in the history of civilization, really. This is the first era that sexuality globally has kind of gotten out of the bag. And there's going to be a lot of pushback and push button, when I can get it, to have that happen. But there's never been as much sex being explored, experimented with, new tribes gathering together across the board, across a broad pantheon of sexual orientations that could be possible. Just the other day, Facebook announced, besides the traditional gender identifications, something like 50+ orientations that someone could select as their personal orientation. So this is something that is exploding on the one hand and expanding. Millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of people are crossing thresholds of what was acceptable sexual behavior that had never been crossed before, en masse, as groups of people. New tribes are forming and finding each other because of the internet, and being able to congregate, commune, engage, discuss in a way that was never available or possible for that range of sexuality to find its own place, its own niche, and the ecological niche of the sexual wilderness. So there's a pushback also coming up. There's a lot of hysteria about all this sexuality running around and it reminds me kind of like a reefer madness level of hysteria about sexuality. People are totally freaked that people are engaging in sexuality, and it comes up in righteous tones of, well, we're concerned about porn addiction, sex trafficking, all these things which in and of themselves are valid concerns, but they're broad brush strokes across what's really happening and just try to cover up and disavow the personal experience that's going on out there of people finding their own personal path and not feeling encouraged because of, well, somebody's going to think I'm a freak if I reveal my own sexuality. So Pornhub, I think one of the, like the third most trafficked sites on the internet, or at least adult content-oriented sites. This is last year's stats. One site, and 1.6 million visitors per hour average across that site last year. That's a lot of porn viewing. Now, down here at the bottom, just for those of you who haven't already bookmarked Pornhub on your own, there is a URL you can use to continue your research, we'll say. It actually does have a lot of, it's a good site in that regard in terms of it does track a lot of information, and really a lot of revealing stuff can be uncovered or checked out if whatever your interest might be, among other things. So with this explosion that's happening, this is, as I said, unprecedented. So the way it's showing up to a great extent, in my view, is we're in this kind of adolescent phase of sexuality coming to the fore. It's still very immature and irresponsible and reckless, and not a lot of integrity being applied to it. Because of the sex-negative world that it's in, it's really difficult for people to be able to speak honestly or openly, and so it stays hidden still in the shadow realms, and that's where it's mostly emerging. People are doing their exploration, but not in such a straight-up way. So there's a real lack of integrity at this phase in how people are engaging their sexuality.